Hello, welcome to the Learn English Lab. Today's podcast, C1 Level Advanced English Listening Practice topic name is The Psychology of Active versus Passive Listening. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are exploring a topic that honestly sits at the very heart of how we connect with each other, listening. It's way more than just hearing sounds, isn't it? It's this fundamental psychological process. It shapes, well, everything, our work decisions, our relationships, even how we see ourselves.
It really does. It's like the hidden framework of all our communication. And what we found is that the way we actually process what we hear, it runs on two very different psychological tracks.
Two tracks.
Yeah. One is kind of automatic. Think of it like your brain on autopilot. It's built for efficiency.
Yeah.
The other one, that's deliberate. It takes effort, real focus.
Okay, so that's what we're digging into today. Our mission for this deep dive is really to help you, our listener, become, well, a much more effective communicator.
Right. We're going to pull out the core psychological ideas, look at the amazing benefits of getting it right, but also the sometimes pretty catastrophic downsides of getting it wrong.
And we're bringing in the latest research too, right? I saw notes about 2024, 2025 findings.
Absolutely. We've got some fresh neuroscientific insights. The goal is to show you exactly how these modes work and, crucially, when you could consciously choose one over the other to really make an impact.
Because the stakes are high, aren't they? The difference between just hearing and truly listening can apparently make or break a career or even a relationship.
It really can. It's often that fine line between a major success and a costly mistake. Sometimes an embarrassing one, too.
Okay, let's jump right into an example. Picture this. Sarah, she's a sharp marketing executive in a buzzing New York City office. She's laying out this complex, really innovative strategy to her team.
Okay.
She gets deep into the crucial demographic data, the specific targets for her plan. But her boss, Mr. Thompson, he's doing the classic passive listening thing. He's nodding, maybe making eye contact now and then.
But
he keeps glancing down at his phone. Checking emails, notifications, whatever, right when Sarah's hitting her most critical points.
the divided attention trap. So he's hearing the words, technically, but his brain's trying to juggle, trying to minimize the effort while still looking like he's paying attention.
Exactly. And the result. When Sarah finishes, they ask him about the details, and he sort of vaguely remembers, oh yeah, the idea about social media. That was the easy, familiar part.
But he missed the crucial stuff.
Totally missed it. The complex targeting, the budget specifics, gone. And that little moment of him checking his phone, it wasn't just rude.
No, it had real consequences.
Huge ones. Because the core strategy was misunderstood, the whole team lost 2 extra weeks reworking a plan that should have been greenlit right then and there. Passive listening literally cost them 2 weeks and a lot of resources.
Wow. Okay, so hold that image of the corporate mess up. Now, let's contrast that with someone like, say, Dr. Elena Ramirez. She's a therapist, maybe just a few blocks away from that office. She's using deeply active techniques. She's carefully paraphrasing what her client says, asking those open-ended questions, maintaining really steady, distraction-free eye contact. Her client is struggling with some long-term anxiety.
So she's not just hearing the story, she's tuning into the feeling behind it.
Precisely. It's that deliberate, focused effort. It makes the client feel truly heard, safe enough to actually start exploring these deep-seated anxieties, maybe break through some real emotional barriers.
So Dr. Ramirez's active listening is actually transformative for the client.
It literally changes the client's life path. And the contrast is just stark, isn't it? Passive listening leads to rework, confusion, waste. Active listening, that leads to healing, breakthroughs, real connection.
All right, let's unpack this default mode first, then passive listening. You described it as running on autopilot. What does that actually mean in terms of, brain effort?
It means we're basically just catching sounds. We process them just enough to recognize the words, maybe the basic topic, but we're not really firing up the higher cognitive gears needed for deep understanding or analysis, or even remembering it properly later.
Okay, and psychologically, where does this come from? Why is autopilot our default?
Well, it's rooted deep in the brain's obsession with efficiency. Your brain uses a ton of energy, right? So it's constantly looking for shortcuts, ways to conserve resources.
So it's an evolutionary thing. Saving energy was key back then.
Absolutely key for survival.
Yeah.
Our auditory system evolved to handle sounds passively, kind of in the background, through the peripheral nervous system. Think about early humans.
Right.
They needed to constantly scan their environment, listen for that twig snap, a change in the wind, potential threats, But they had to do it without stopping their main task, like foraging or hunting. It was a low-cost environmental sweep, always running.
But now that same energy-saving system is bumping up against our crazy digital lives. We're not listening for predators in the woods anymore.
No, we're trying to manage a digital avalanche. Scrolling emails while you're supposed to be on a Zoom call, half listening to a really interesting deep dive like this one while you're squished onto the subway.
Guilty as charged sometimes.
We all are. And this is where the system starts to break down in situations that demand real information processing. When our attention is split, the brain starts filtering things selectively. And this is where something called selective attention bias really bites us.
Selective attention bias. Explain that a bit more.
It means we tend to prioritize information that's familiar or easy to process, or maybe just confirms what we already think. If a really important detail comes along that contradicts our assumptions, or maybe just requires more mental energy to grasp,
Passive listening just skips over it.
often, it gets filtered out.
Yeah.
And what you're left with is an incomplete picture, maybe even a completely wrong understanding of what was said.
Okay, so if we could peek inside the brain during this passive mode, you mentioned some specific neuroimaging findings from 2025. What did they show?
Yeah, those studies give us a much clearer map. When someone's passively listening, the brain activity is mostly lighting up in the auditory cortex. That's the part that just receives and processes the basic sound signals.
Okay, the input zone.
Right.
Yeah.
But here's the key. There's very little activity happening in the higher level brain regions, especially the prefrontal cortex or PFC.
And the PFC is crucial because that's like the brain's CEO, right? Executive functions.
That's exactly it. The PFC handles decision-making, keeps information in your working memory, and critically important here, it handles inhibition control.
Inhibiting distractions.
Inhibiting distractions, inhibiting the urge to interrupt, the urge to jump in with your own thoughts, or just letting your mind wander off somewhere else. Passive listening neatly sidesteps all that hard work the PFC has to do. Your brain's just receiving the data stream. It's not doing the heavy lifting required for deep analysis or locking it into long-term memory.
It sounds like this default mode is something we constantly need to fight against. But you also said it's not just laziness, that passive listening actually has some maybe unexpected uses.
That's a really important point. It's not inherently bad or lazy. It's incredibly efficient when used in the right context. It mainly offers two big pluses: background efficiency and something called incidental learning.
Incidental learning, like picking things up by accident. Tell me more about that, maybe in a school setting.
Okay, picture a huge lecture hall, maybe at a big university like UCLA, hundreds of students. A student might be laser focused on taking notes for their upcoming history final.
Right.
But the professor briefly goes off on a related tangent, maybe something interesting but not critical for the exam. The student's main focus is still on their notes, but their auditory system is still running, passively picking up the sounds of that tangent.
So it seeps in somehow.
It can, yeah. It gets processed at a low level. Then, maybe weeks later, that student is writing an essay or in a discussion, and suddenly they pull out a useful concept or a specific term from that tangent, even though they weren't actively trying to learn it at the time. It was learned incidentally.
That reminds me of the story about Jake, the high school teacher in Boston. He was using faculty meetings strategically.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Jake knew these faculty meetings were often routine administrative stuff. So, to conserve his mental energy for planning his big, complex lesson on the Revolutionary War,
He'd zone out a bit.
he'd slip into passive listening mode. He was physically present, nodding along, but his real cognitive effort was on his lesson plan. But crucially, his ears were still open. And in the background noise of the meeting, he caught a casual mention, just a few words, about a new state grant program for history field trips.
He wasn't actively listening for that, but it registered.
Pure incidental learning. It just stuck somewhere in the back of his mind. Weeks later, it popped up. He remembered it, looked into it, applied for the grant,
And got the funding.
and was able to take his students on these amazing immersive field trips to Lexington and Concord. That ability to snag useful, non-critical bits of information from your surroundings without draining your main focus, that's the real power of passive listening.
So it functions almost like a low-level awareness system, keeping tabs on the environment without disrupting your main work.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why it can be useful in busy collaborative workplaces. Think about those big open plan offices like you see at tech companies in California. Passive listening lets employees stay generally aware of what their team is up to, the flow of different projects, without constantly breaking their concentration when they need to do deep focus work like coding or designing.
We're like the Wall Street trader example.
Exactly. During an earnings call, a trader's main focus is glued to the real-time data, the market fluctuations. But they're passively absorbing the overall tone of the call, the CEO's confidence level, maybe picking up on subtle trends in the Q&A. That background info informs their gut feeling, their subconscious risk assessment without distracting from the hard data.
Interesting. And does this passive mode connect to creativity at all? The idea that sometimes you need to let your mind wander to have breakthroughs?
It absolutely does. There was a fascinating analysis in Psychology Today back in 2024 that talked about this. It suggested that letting your mind drift into these passive modes can actually help creativity.
How so?
Well, imagine a Hollywood scriptwriting team brainstorming. Someone might be stuck on a character's motivation. By passively absorbing the surrounding chatter, maybe about a totally unrelated plot point, or even just office gossip, their mind is freed up to make unexpected connections.
The aha moment.
Exactly. Those moments often happen when you stop trying so hard to focus deliberately and allow these background associations to bubble up. Passive listening can sometimes create the mental space for that kind of nonlinear thinking.
Okay, so passive listening has its moments, its efficiencies. But the cost, especially when we default to it in the wrong situations, can be huge. Why is relying on this autopilot so dangerous when the stakes are high?
Because fundamentally it relies on mental shortcuts. And the most dangerous one we talked about is that selective attention bias. When we're passive, our brain isn't just taking things in neutrally, it's actively filtering.
Filtering out what?
Filtering out information that doesn't fit our expectations or maybe contradicts our existing beliefs. We often end up listening not to truly understand, but just to categorize information quickly or to find confirmation for what we already think.
Which makes real empathy pretty much impossible, right?
Almost impossible. Because you're not genuinely tuning into the other person's emotional state, the nuances in their voice or body language. You're just tracking the surface words, fitting them into your existing mental boxes.
And this filtering can have devastating real-world impacts, especially in fields where mistakes are critical, like healthcare. Let's go back to Maria, the nurse in Chicago, checking charts during that shift change.
Right. Maria was multitasking, checking charts while listening to the handover report. That's a classic passive listening scenario because her attention was divided. The outgoing nurse mentioned a small but absolutely critical change in a patient's medication dosage. Maybe the doctor had adjusted it slightly.
But Maria was focused on the chart.
Exactly. She probably registered the main topic, medication for patient X, because that was familiar. But she completely missed the specific, crucial detail about the changed dose. Her brain filtered it out as non-essential noise while she focused on her primary task, the chart.
So she logged the old familiar dosage instead of the new one.
Yes. And that passive oversight led directly to a patient complication the next day. Thankfully minor in this case, but it highlights a massive systemic issue.
And the statistics you shared are genuinely alarming. The Joint Commission finding that miscommunication often rooted in this kind of passive listening during handoffs is involved in up to 80% of serious medical errors.
80%. It's staggering. 4 out of 5 major mistakes have a communication breakdown component. And the cost isn't just financial, though that's huge too. A 2025 update linked poor communication, often stemming from passive listening, to about $1.7 billion in malpractice costs each year.
Billion with a B?
Billion with a B.
And even more tragically, nearly 2,000 preventable deaths annually in the U.S. alone.
Wow. And you also mentioned those seemingly harmless passive acknowledgments, the quick, got it, nah.
Yeah, those little nods when your mind is actually a million miles away, they contribute to something like 25% of patient safety incidents. They give a false sense of understanding.
They're not harmless confirmations, they're actively dangerous. They really are.
Yeah.
And organizations like AHRQ, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, they report that inadequate sign-outs, often because the incoming person is listening passively, lead to critical information being missed. Things like subtle but important changes in a patient's mental state get overlooked, delaying vital diagnoses or interventions. Relying on autopilot in healthcare is demonstrably dangerous.
And this damage isn't limited to professional settings. The psychological cost ripples right into our personal lives, doesn't it? It eats away at trust, at the health of our relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Passive listening is like acid for intimacy. Because what does it signal to the other person?
Disinterest, that you don't care.
Exactly. It signals disinterest, invalidation. Think about Tom, the engineer in Seattle we mentioned. He comes home, he's mentally drained from a tough day at Boeing. His wife, Lisa, starts telling him about her stressful day, maybe a really difficult student she's dealing with.
And Tom slips into passive mode.
Yeah. He hears the words, he gets the topic, bad day at school, difficult student. but he completely misses the underlying emotion, the stress, the frustration, maybe her need for support or just validation.
He might offer a practical solution, but misses the emotional need.
Precisely. And Lisa just feels unheard, unseen, alone with her stress. And psychological studies show this pattern over and over again. When one partner consistently feels unheard, relationship satisfaction plummets. Emotional distance grows, arguments increase. Feeling listened to is fundamental to feeling valued.
It also seems like this creates very real financial and creative losses in other fields too, like media or entertainment.
Definitely. Take the Hollywood director, Alex. Remember him? He was stressed about the film's budget. During a quick meeting, he passively okayed a complicated plot twist suggested by the scriptwriter.
His mind was on the money, not the story detail.
Right. His cognitive bias, the budget stress, filtered his listening. He didn't actively engage with the story implications, didn't ask the tough questions about whether the twist really worked structurally or emotionally.
So he nodded it through without deep thought.
He did. And months later, deep in the editing process, it became painfully obvious.
Yeah.
The twist felt forced. It didn't land with test audiences. The result, millions of dollars wasted on expensive reshoots and frantic post-production fixes to try and salvage it. Passive agreement in a creative collaboration can be just as costly as in a medical setting.
And finally, that example of the journalist in Washington, D.C., passively listening to a politician's speech while maybe checking notes or Twitter.
Yeah, that's a recipe for trouble.
Yeah.
They might catch the main sound bites, the easy headlines, but they risk missing the subtle policy nuances, the careful phrasing, the context that completely changes the meaning of what the politician is actually saying or promising.
Which leads to inaccurate reporting.
Directly. It fuels public misunderstanding, erodes trust in the media. Passive listening, in short, is the enemy of depth, accuracy, and genuine understanding in almost any important context.
Okay, we've clearly seen the risks of running on autopilot. So now, let's make the shift. Let's talk about the conscious choice. Active listening. This isn't just about paying attention, is it? It's a deliberate psychological act. How would you define it?
Active listening is absolutely intentional. It's a goal-focused process where you, the listener, commit your full cognitive resources. You're aiming to fully concentrate, to truly understand not just the words, but the meaning behind them, to respond thoughtfully and, importantly, to remember what was said.
It transforms listening from just something that happens to you into something you actively do.
Exactly. It's an intentional interpersonal exchange, not just an auditory event.
Now, this sounds very modern, like something from a leadership seminar, but you mentioned its roots go deeper, back to humanistic psychology.
They really do. The concept was significantly shaped and popularized by the psychologist Carl Rogers back in the mid-20th century. For Rogers, active listening wasn't just a technique. It was the core mechanism for creating empathy and what he called unconditional positive regard in therapy.
Unconditional positive regard, meaning accepting the person without judgment.
Precisely. Rogers believed that when a person feels truly, completely heard, meaning their internal world, their feelings, are acknowledged respectfully, without judgment, it creates a sense of psychological safety. And that safety is absolutely essential for personal growth, for healing, for people to be willing to change.
So if passive listening is bottom-up, stimulus-driven, active listening is top-down, a conscious command from the brain.
Absolutely. Psychologically, it's like flipping a switch in your brain. You move way beyond just the auditory cortex. You're now deeply engaging those higher brain functions we talked about.
Like the prefrontal cortex again?
Definitely the prefrontal cortex. That executive control center has to work hard to maintain that sustained focus. And crucially, to inhibit all those impulses, the urge to interrupt, the urge to finish their sentence, the urge to plan your rebuttal, or just let your mind drift off to your grocery list.
And what about the emotional side of the conversation?
That brings in the limbic system. That's the network involved in processing emotions. Active listening demands both: the cognitive heavy lifting to analyze the facts and logic, and the emotional sensitivity to register the feelings, the tone, the subtext.
So it's a whole brain activity, really.
It is. And when you engage like that, you create this positive feedback loop. You use verbal cues like paraphrasing and nonverbal cues like nodding to show you're tracking. This actually reinforces the neural pathways for better memory and deeper comprehension.
The good news is, this is a skill. It can be learned. Based on Rogers' work and what we know now from leadership experts, what are the practical, hands-on techniques listeners can start using right away?
Okay, we can break it down into about 5 core techniques. Pillar number 1 is paraphrasing.
Restating what they said.
Yes, but in your own words. This is key. It's not just parroting, It's checking your understanding. Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, the main bottleneck seems to be X, not Y. This confirms you haven't twisted their meaning through your own filters.
Got it. That would have helped Mr. Thompson avoid his mistake. What's number 2?
Number 2 is crucial for connection, reflecting feelings. This goes beyond the facts to acknowledge the emotion. Wow, it sounds like that situation made you feel incredibly frustrated, or I can hear how worried you are about that.
So you're validating the emotion itself.
You are. And that builds rapport almost instantly. People feel seen. Third technique, summarizing.
Recapping.
Yeah, especially in longer or more complex conversations. Periodically, you just briefly recap the main points covered so far. Okay, so we've agreed on A and B, but we still need to figure out C, right? It keeps everyone on the same page and prevents misunderstandings from building up.
Makes sense. What's number 4? This one seems critical today.
It really is. Nonverbal cues. So much communication isn't words. Active listening involves showing you're engaged physically, maintaining comfortable eye contact, not staring, but connecting, leaning in slightly, nodding appropriately, and the big one,
Putting the phone away.
putting the phone away, and turning off notifications. Eliminating those physical distractions sends a powerful message of respect and full attention.
Okay, and the 5th technique for truly active listening.
Asking open-ended questions. These are questions that can't just be answered with a yes or no. They invite the speaker to elaborate, to explore their thoughts and feelings more deeply. Instead of, did that work? Ask, how did that approach work out for the team? Or what were the main challenges you faced with that?
Encouraging more dialogue, not just getting facts.
Exactly. And actually, more recent studies, some from 2024, have added another layer, using small, continuous verbal affirmations.
Like saying, or I see.
Precisely. Little cues like, I see, okay, go on, or that makes sense. They signal you're still tracking with the speaker, actively processing, without actually interrupting their flow. It helps them feel encouraged to continue sharing.
Okay, so we have the techniques. Now let's talk about the payoff. The benefits sound huge, starting with our own mental well-being. How does being truly listened to actually affect our stress levels and brain chemistry?
It has a direct, measurable impact. When you feel genuinely heard and understood, when someone validates your experience, it triggers the brain's reward system. Specifically, it leads to a release of dopamine.
Dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter.
Exactly. That dopamine hit generates feelings of pleasure, connection, and satisfaction. And that directly counteracts stress hormones like cortisol.
Yeah.
It makes you feel less isolated, less overwhelmed by whatever you're dealing with.
So the simple act of listening well can literally make someone feel better and build their psychological resilience.
It absolutely can.
Yeah.
And this is fundamental in therapeutic settings. Think about Veterans Affairs clinics helping veterans with PTSD. Active listening is the absolute cornerstone of that therapy. The therapist's focused, non-judgmental presence creates the safety needed for the veteran to begin processing incredibly difficult traumatic memories. That's essential for healing.
Let's bring it back to relationships, too. We saw how Tom's passive listening damaged his connection with Lisa in Seattle. Now, what about Emily and Mark in Austin, Texas? Their story shows the flip side, right? The power of active listening to heal.
It's a fantastic example of putting these techniques into practice. Mark, the software developer, used to habitually tune out when his wife Emily, the real estate agent, talked about her stressful days. Their conversations became superficial, resentment built up. Things were apparently getting pretty bad.
Heading towards a breakdown.
It sounds like it. But then Mark made a conscious effort to change. He learned and started using active listening, specifically the reflection technique.
So what did that look like?
Well, one evening, Emily was telling him about a really frustrating situation. A buyer pulling out of a deal right at the last minute after tons of work. Instead of just nodding or changing the subject, Mark paused, looked at her and said something like, "Wow, so the buyer backed out right at the end after everything you put in? It sounds like that made you feel totally undervalued and maybe even a bit betrayed."
He didn't just hear the facts. He named the likely feeling.
He named the feeling.
Yeah.
He validated her emotional experience. And according to their story, that single act of reflection was a turning point. It wasn't just words, it was a signal. I see your struggle. I recognize your pain.
And that opened things up.
Completely. It opened the door to real conversation, rebuilt the emotional connection, and apparently helped them steer away from a potential divorce. It shows how intentional listening isn't just nice. It builds tangible relational security.
The impact is just as real in the professional world, too. You mentioned a 2024 Harvard Business Review piece linking good listening directly to leadership effectiveness.
Yes. Consistently, studies show that leaders who are rated as good listeners build trust faster, foster better team collaboration, and ultimately achieve better business results. Why? Because information gets understood correctly the first time, fewer mistakes are made, and people feel more motivated when they feel heard.
And we saw this in healthcare again with Nurse Sophia in Miami. Using reflecting techniques boosted her patient satisfaction scores.
It makes perfect sense. When patients feel rushed or dismissed products of passive listening, their anxiety skyrockets. But when a nurse takes a moment to reflect back their concerns, it sounds like you're feeling quite anxious about this upcoming procedure. It lowers anxiety, builds trust, and actually improves the patient's willingness to follow medical advice. It directly impacts outcomes.
The classroom is another powerful example. That Harvard study finding teachers using active listening got more engagement and better retention from students.
Right. Think about Mrs. Lopez, the middle school teacher in Miami dealing with a student completely lost in algebra. The student said the variables, X and Y, just felt abstract and confusing.
A common struggle.
Very common. But Ms. Lopez didn't just mark the answers wrong, she actively listened and reflected. Okay, so you're saying that because X and Y aren't concrete numbers, they feel kind of unreal, and that's what mixes you up.
She pinpointed the source of the confusion, the feeling behind it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She validated the student's experience of the difficulty. And by understanding that specific cognitive hurdle, the abstractness, she could then tailor her explanation. Maybe she used real-world examples, making the variables stand for something tangible.
And it worked!
Dramatically. The student's understanding, grades, and even confidence improves significantly. Active listening allows for that kind of personalized teaching and problem solving that passive instruction misses entirely.
Okay, let's pull back for a second and compare these two modes directly one last time. From a purely cognitive brain mechanics perspective, what's the absolute core difference?
It really boils down to the direction of processing. Passive listening is fundamentally bottom-up. The sound comes in, hits the auditory system, and gets processed automatically, often superficially, based on the stimulus itself.
Stimulus-driven.
Right. Active listening, on the other hand, is top-down. Your higher brain functions, your goals, your attention, your intention to understand are driving the process. You're consciously directing your cognitive resources to interpret the incoming information, integrate it with what you already know, analyze it, feel it.
Goal-oriented. And it's this top-down effort that lets us tap into things like empathy, using our own brain's wiring. You mentioned mirror neurons earlier.
Yes, that's a fascinating part of it. Active listening seems to engage our mirror neuron system. These are brain cells that fire both when we do an action and when we see someone else do that same action. When we actively listen, especially paying attention to nonverbal cues and tone, these mirror neurons help us simulate the speaker's emotional state internally.
So we almost literally feel a bit of what they're feeling.
In a way, yes. It creates a neurological resonance, a bridge between minds. This is likely a key biological mechanism behind empathy and building strong social bonds. Passive listening doesn't really engage this system in the same way.
And passive listening actually risks creating that uncomfortable feeling of cognitive dissonance.
It does. Imagine you're passively listening. You hear someone saying words that sound calm, but their body language is screaming stress. They're fidgeting, avoiding eye contact. Your passive brain, seeking efficiency, might just register the calm words and filter out the contradictory, more complex, nonverbal signals.
Creating a mismatch.
A mismatch between inputs. And cognitive dissonance is uncomfortable. So the passive brain often resolves it the easy way, by dismissing the nonverbal cues, maybe thinking, oh, they're just exaggerating, rather than doing the harder work of integrating the conflicting data to get the real picture.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the outcomes then. Passive versus active.
Right. Passive listening, good for saving energy, great for picking up incidental information in low-stakes situations. But major downsides: high risk of errors, misunderstandings, shallow relationships, missed opportunities.
And active listening.
Active listening requires effort, yes, but the payoff is huge. Deep understanding, strong relationships built on trust and empathy, better problem solving, and research suggests it even leads to resolving conflicts about 30% faster.
So the big takeaway isn't really passive listening bad, it's about context, right? It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
Precisely. Strategic application is everything. Passive listening is perfectly fine, even desirable in some contexts. If you're chilling out listening to music in Central Park or maybe undergoing music therapy, you don't need deep analytical processing. Relaxing and conserving energy is the goal.
But when the conversation matters, when the outcome is important,
active listening has to be the default. It's absolutely essential in high-stakes scenarios. Think about those intense contract negotiations in Detroit's auto industry. A passive assumption about a single clause related to benefits or job security could literally cost thousands of people their jobs. There's no room for passive misunderstanding there.
Or trying to navigate the flood of information, and sometimes misinformation, online.
Oh, crucial there. Passively scrolling and absorbing headlines is easy, dangerously easy. Actively listening, which in this context means critically evaluating the source, questioning the claims, looking for evidence, is vital for not getting swept away by misinformation.
And you had a legal example, too, about jurors in places like Washington, D.C. courtrooms.
Yes, the courtroom is a pressure cooker for listening. Jurors must actively engage. They need to listen intently to complex testimony, scrutinize evidence, resist their own biases. If they slip into passive listening, maybe letting their preconceived notions or selective attention take over,
they could reach a biased verdict.
Exactly. An unjust outcome based on incomplete or filtered understanding. Fair legal outcomes depend entirely on the jury's commitment to active critical listening.
Let's zoom in on how this plays out across different parts of American life. How does choosing active engagement drive things like innovation and safety in the workplace?
Well, active listening acts as a powerful counterforce to that corporate culture of constant multitasking we talked about. Genuine innovation rarely comes from people half listening in meetings. It comes from deeply engaging with ideas.
Like CEO Lena at that tech startup in San Francisco.
Right. Her engineer pitched a complex but potentially game-changing AI feature. Lena could have just given a quick thumbs up, especially being busy, but she didn't. She consciously switched into active mode.
What did she do?
She asked probing questions, not to challenge him, but to make sure she truly understood the underlying tech, the market fit. She used paraphrasing. So the core algorithm works by, and summarizing, okay, so the main benefits are X, Y, and Z. This intense engagement wasn't just about evaluating the idea.
It actually improved it.
It did. That deep dialogue helped them collaboratively uncover a key improvement, a refinement the engineer hadn't even considered alone. That led directly to a much stronger app, which then helped them secure major venture capital funding. Active listening became part of the innovation process itself.
That's a great positive example. Now contrast that with the safety issue in the Detroit factory.
A stark contrast. There, a supervisor was preoccupied, stressed. A maintenance worker briefly mentioned a concern about a machine guard. Maybe it seemed a bit loose. The supervisor, listening passively, gave a quick, dismissive, yeah, I'll check it out later, and mentally moved on.
Didn't truly register the potential risk.
Didn't actively process it, didn't ask clarifying questions, didn't prioritize it. Days later, there was a preventable accident involving that exact machine guard. It's a harsh reminder of why organizations like OSHA hammer home the need for active, documented communication about safety concerns. The listening style can literally be a matter of workplace safety.
Moving into schools, we see active listening changing how educators handle sensitive issues like bullying, too.
Yes, look at Principal Garcia's initiative in that Los Angeles public school. He realized just punishing bullies wasn't solving the root problem. So he trained his staff in active listening, specifically on reflecting students' feelings when they reported incidents.
So instead of just fact-finding, they'd say
things like, wow, when that happened on the playground, it sounds like it made you feel really scared and alone, validating the emotional impact first.
And that made a difference.
A huge difference. Students felt heard, understood, less helpless. It fostered enough trust to develop a more comprehensive, school-wide anti-bullying program that reportedly cut incidents by over 40%.
Yeah.
Creating that emotionally safe space through listening was key.
That principle applies to personal relationships, too, like mending that friendship between Rachel and Sophie in Nashville.
Right. Their friendship nearly ended because Sophie kept passively listening whenever Rachel tried to talk about her struggles with a major career change. Rachel felt completely unsupported.
What turned it around?
Sophie finally realized her mistake, apologized, and consciously started using active techniques. She started summarizing Rachel's specific career worries back to her. Okay, so the main things stressing you out right now are A, B, and C. That simple act of demonstrating she was truly hearing the details, not just the general topic, was enough to rebuild the trust and mend the friendship. The core need feeling understood was finally met.
And in diverse places like Miami, with many cultures and languages, active listening must be even more critical for connection.
Absolutely essential. When you have language barriers or different cultural communication styles, passive listening is almost guaranteed to fail. Active listening forces you to pay much closer attention to nonverbal cues, to tone of voice. It prompts you to ask clarifying questions respectfully. Could you explain that part again? Or help me understand what that means in your context. It demonstrates a commitment to understanding across differences, fostering genuine inclusion where passive assumptions would create division.
Let's end this section back in healthcare, the highest stakes. We know passive listening is a huge factor in handover failures, maybe contributing to 2/3 of them.
A terrifying statistic. But again, active listening offers the antidote. Think about Dr. Patel in Boston. The patient comes in with these vague, scattered symptoms, a bit of this, bit of that. Easy to dismiss passively as maybe stress or unrelated minor issues.
But Dr. Patel didn't dismiss them.
No, she actively engaged. She listened intently to each seemingly unrelated symptom. She reflected them back. Okay, so you've noticed X and also Y, and that started around Z. She asked open-ended questions about timing and severity. She was actively trying to assemble the puzzle pieces.
And by actively processing that scattered information,
She synthesized it. She saw a pattern that passive listening, focused on efficiency and quick categorization, would have completely missed. And that synthesis led to the early diagnosis of a rare, potentially life-threatening condition. Active listening didn't just improve communication. It was literally life-saving in that instance.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. The goal now is for everyone listening to actually make that shift, right? To move from defaulting to passive listening to consciously choosing active listening when it matters. What are some practical, concrete steps people can take to build this skill, this mental muscle?
Great question. Based on psychological training methods, we can suggest 5 key steps. First one might sound a bit unrelated, but it's foundational. Practice mindfulness.
Meditation, how does that help listening?
Active listening starts with controlling your own attention. Mindfulness exercises, whether through apps or just simple techniques like focusing on your breath, train your brain to stay present and resist distractions. It builds that crucial inhibitory control you need to not let your mind wander when someone else is talking.
Okay, train the attention muscle first. What's step 2?
Step 2. Start small with Rogers' empathy techniques. Don't wait for a high-stakes crisis. Practice paraphrasing and reflecting feelings in everyday low-risk conversations. Paraphrase your colleagues' instructions. Okay, so you need a report by 3 p.m. with sections A and B. Reflect your friend's minor frustration. Sounds like that traffic jam was really annoying. Build the habit when the pressure's off.
Makes sense. Practice makes perfect. Step 3.
Role play. Difficult conversations. Seriously. Grab a trusted friend or colleague and practice actively listening in a simulated high-stakes scenario. Maybe a disagreement, delivering feedback, or hearing criticism. This lets you practice using paraphrasing, summarizing, and reflecting feelings before you're in the heat of a real emotionally charged moment. It builds muscle memory.
Okay, practice scenarios. Number 4 is maybe the hardest.
Maybe, but it's incredibly valuable. Actively seek feedback on your listening. It's really hard to judge our own listening skills accurately. Ask people you trust, colleagues, partners, friends. Hey, in that conversation we just had, did you feel like I was really listening? Was I interrupting? What did my body language say? Getting honest feedback, even if it stings a little, is the fastest way to identify blind spots and improve.
Be brave. Ask for feedback. Got it. And the 5th step.
Make those verbal affirmations and open-ended questions a regular part of your communication toolkit. Consciously practice sprinkling in, I see, tell me more about that. How did that make you feel? It keeps you engaged and encourages the speaker. And remember the salesman in Chicago.
Yeah, the one who boosted sales by 25%.
Exactly. He went to a seminar, learned these techniques, and started consciously applying them in client calls, asking better questions, confirming understanding. It wasn't just about being nice, it directly translated to better business outcomes. Active listening is an economic skill too.
Now, all this is maybe harder in our current digital world, isn't it? With so much remote work, Zoom calls. Does active listening change when we're not face-to-face?
That's the big challenge right now. And yes, it's different. Early studies, some coming out in 2025, are suggesting there are actual neural differences in how our brains process information in virtual meetings compared to in person.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. On a screen, we lose a lot of the subtle nonverbal cues, the peripheral awareness of the room. It's easier for our brains to slip back into that passive energy-saving mode, maybe checking email on another screen.
The Zoom zone out.
Exactly. So we have to be even more intentional, more deliberate about active listening in virtual settings.
Which brings us to Kim, the manager in Denver. She found a practical way to combat this virtual passive listening.
She did. She managed a remote team and noticed projects were getting delayed because of misunderstandings on calls, classic passive listening fallout. So she implemented specific active techniques for the virtual space.
Like what?
She made a point of frequently pausing and explicitly asking team members to paraphrase key decisions or action items to confirm understanding. And crucially, she used screen sharing during the call to type out summaries of decisions and next steps in real time, making everyone visually confirm agreement.
So making the understanding visible and explicit.
Exactly. By externalizing the summary, making it concrete on the screen, she forced active engagement and prevented the misunderstandings and delays that often plague virtual collaboration. It requires extra effort, but it's essential online. #outro.
Wow. This has been a really comprehensive look at something we do every day but maybe don't think about enough. From Mr. Thompson's costly mistake in that NYC meeting, all the way to Emily and Mark saving their marriage in Austin, the psychological choice between passive and active listening seems incredibly powerful.
It really is transformative. It's about shifting from just letting sound wash over us out of unconscious efficiency to choosing deliberate, focused engagement for true efficacy. And like Carl Rogers pointed out all those years ago, truly listening to someone isn't just a technique, it's a profound act of respect.
Yeah. And embracing that respect, that active engagement, it fosters real understanding, it sparks innovation, and it seems to be the quiet engine driving both our personal growth and our professional success.
Couldn't agree more. It's fundamental.
We really hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, some concrete tools and the motivation to choose full active engagement in your next important conversation. Recognizing that the decision to truly listen is, in many ways, the decision to fully connect with the world and with the people in it. Like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel.
Hello, welcome to Learn English Lab. Today's deep dive C1 level advanced English listening practice topic name is Understanding Accents in Real Conversations. We're jumping straight into something that, well, it challenges almost everyone learning English at a high level, and frankly, even native speakers too. We're talking about the incredible, sometimes bewildering variety of American accents. And for you, our listeners aiming for real fluency and connection, getting a handle on this is pretty crucial. So our mission today is to really dive deep. We're going beyond just pointing at a map. We want to explore the mechanics, the psychology behind it all, and the real world impacts these speech variations have, and hopefully equip you with some tools to navigate conversations better wherever you are. Let's kick things off with a situation, something that probably happens thousands, maybe millions of times a day. Picture a busy New York City coffee shop. Really hectic, and you've got Maria. She's just moved there from Texas, and she has this very noticeable thick southern drawl. She goes up to order. Simple request, right? I'd like a large coffee with cream and sugar, please.
Sounds clear enough. But the barista, a native New Yorker, speaks super fast, clipped words, that typical NYC energy, and because their brain is tuned to that rhythm, that quick delivery, they just last. They completely mishear Maria's slower, elongated vowel sounds. You can see the confusion. Then the barista snaps back, maybe a bit impatient, a latte with extra foam.
Yeah, and that little exchange, coffee versus latte, it perfectly captures the issue, doesn't it?
It really does.
It shows that accents aren't just flavor. They're fundamental to how we communicate our identity. And when those signals don't align, misunderstandings happen, even simple ones.
So this deep dive is about seeing accents as maybe windows into culture, region, identity, and learning how to open them, not, get frustrated and slam them shut.
Exactly. And that shared frustration in the coffee shop, both speaking English, technically, but the acoustic signals were just too different. Before we can figure out how to deal with that, we need a foundation. Like, what is an accent, linguistically speaking?
Right. Let's define our terms.
Okay, so basically, an accent is the distinctive way a specific person, or usually a group of people, pronounces words, but it's more than just sounds. It's heavily shaped by things like geography, where you grew up, historical events even like migrations, cultural factors, social groups. In the US, accents are like a living history book. You can hear the echoes of the Great Migration, different waves of immigration, the push westward. It's all in the way people talk.
I like that. History written in speech. So for you listening, it means accents are complex. They're not just isolated sounds. Maybe think of them like flavors in a stew. Each one adds something unique, makes the whole dish richer, more interesting.
That's a great analogy. It really helps. And it lets us tackle the biggest myth right away.
Ah, yes, the myth of the standard or neutral accent.
Exactly. So many learners aim for this general American thing, thinking it's the default, the one without an accent.
Which doesn't actually exist, right?
Yeah. Linguistically, no, there's no default setting. What sounds totally normal, neutral to someone in Nebraska might sound very accented to someone in Boston, and the other way around too. That general American you hear on national news, it's just one variant, a very familiar one, sure, because of media exposure, but it's a specific socio-regional choice. It's not correct or unaccented speech.
So step one is accepting. Everyone has an accent. Period.
Absolutely, everyone. Once you accept that, you can start looking at the building blocks. What makes one accent different from another?
Okay, the mechanics.
Yeah.
You're talking about what? Three main things. The first one being the actual sounds. Phonetic variations.
Correct. Phonetics. How specific sounds are physically produced and how they're perceived by the listener. Take the letter R, it's a big one. A traditional Boston accent, often non-rhotic, meaning their R sound gets dropped at the end of words or before consonants. So car becomes ka. Harvard becomes Harvard. But then you go down south, and in some dialects, that after a vowel is really stressed, maybe even slightly rolled. Completely different way of making the sound. So you can see how misunderstandings happen just based on one letter.
Okay, so individual sounds matter, but then there's the music of it all. Intonation and rhythm. Prosody, you called it.
Prosody, yes. The melody and the pace of speech. It's a huge regional marker. Think about that Southern accent again. Often a bit slower, right? More melodic, changes in pitch, a kind of deliberate pacing. People often associate it with warmth, maybe thoughtfulness.
Compared to the New York accent.
Exactly. Often much faster. Clipped syllables, big jumps in pitch for emphasis. It can sound urgent, very direct. So it's not just what sounds you use, but the speed and the tune you use them with.
And the third piece is how sounds change over time. Vowel shifts.
Vowel shifts, yeah. These are fascinating. It's when the pronunciation of a whole set of vowel sounds starts to rotate systematically across a region. The most studied one recently is the Northern Cities vowel shift. You find it across the Great Lakes area from upstate New York through places like Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee.
And what happens there?
Well, one key feature is the short A sound, like in cat. It gets pronounced higher and further forward in the mouth. So cats start to sound more like key-at to outsiders. It's this whole system of vowels moving around that creates that really distinct Great Lakes sound.
And this linguistic structure, the sounds, the rhythm, the shifts, it connects so deeply to identity and history.
Right.
Let's take African American Vernacular English, AAVE, as a case study. It's often misunderstood.
Terribly misunderstood. AAVE isn't slang, and it's not bad English. It's a complete systematic linguistic system. It has really deep historical roots, developing from West African languages, interacting with various dialects, especially Southern American English. And it has unique grammatical structures. They aren't errors. They're rules within that dialect that convey very specific meanings.
Can you give an example, something that shows that sophistication?
The habitual be is a perfect one. In what people call standard English, if you say he is working, it means right now at this moment. But in AAVE, if you say he be working, it means something different. It means he works habitually, regularly. It's an ongoing state or action. Standard English often needs a whole phrase like he's usually working to capture that same precise meaning. AAVE does it efficiently with just be.
That precision really shows how dialect is tied to community and belonging. Which brings us back to that story about young Jamal.
Right. Jamal grew up on Chicago's South Side. His AAVE, the rhythm, the vocabulary, it was central to his identity, how he connected with friends, family. It was, his language.
But then he moved.
He moved to a mostly white suburban school in Minnesota, and suddenly that same way of speaking, which was perfectly correct and meaningful in his community, became a target. Classmates mimicked him, not understanding it was a valid linguistic system. They made him feel like an outsider. His accent went from being a badge of belonging to a source of, pain and isolation.
It really underscores the emotional weight accents carry. You need that emotional intelligence, especially at an advanced level.
Definitely. Mastery isn't just about grammar rules, it's about understanding people.
Okay, let's take that understanding and spread it across the map. Section 2, mapping the mosaic common accents across the USA. Because the diversity is just, wow. It can change street by street sometimes.
It really can. Let's start in the Northeast. These accents are often quite recognizable, partly because the region was settled early, lots of English and Irish influence. Deep roots.
In Boston's got to be the poster child, right? That
Yeah,
dropping Pak the Ka and Havad Yad.
Classic. And it's a real tripwire for people expecting that sound,
And
which leads to stories like Emily's.
the tourists in the pub.
Yeah, Emily from California asks for directions to Harvard Yard. The local bartender hears Harvard Yard. Now, combine the dropped R with the bartender maybe thinking, what would a tourist really be looking for?
Oh, no.
She ends up getting directions to a hardware store. Because phonetically, yard and yad got confused and context didn't help. A simple phonetic rule totally derailed communication. Hilarious, but telling.
And New York. It's not just one thing, is it? It's like layers of sound.
New York is incredibly complex. You have that general impression, fast, maybe loud, emphatic, but the actual sounds vary hugely. Someone from Brooklyn might have a really nasal quality, raising vowels, so coffee becomes almost coffee. But then you go out to Long Island, maybe 30, 40 minutes away. The pace might still be quick, the energy similar, but the specific vowel sounds are often quite different, maybe subtler. We lump it together, but it's a whole family of related urban dialects.
Okay, let's head south. The South. Known for drawls, right? Slower pace.
The drawl, yes. But it's not just speaking slowly. It involves lengthening vowel sounds significantly, and often turning single vowel sounds into double or even triple sounds, diphthongization or trithongization. That's why a simple word like pie might sound stretched out, like pay, or even longer.
And it's not monolithic either. The South is huge.
Absolutely huge. You've got distinct subvarieties. Think of the Appalachian twang, which often preserves older English pronunciation patterns, or go down to Louisiana and you hear the influence of Cajun French in the rhythm, the vocabulary. It's incredibly rich.
And you mentioned earlier that slower pace can carry cultural weight, hospitality, sincerity.
It often gets perceived that way, yes. Pace influences social judgment. Remember Alex, the visitor from the north?
In Alabama.
He's used to a faster pace. When a local woman heard his clipped, quick speech, identified his accent, and then gave him this really warm, unhurried welcome, Alex felt a kind of connection, a sincerity he didn't always get back home. The accent's prosody, its rhythm, seems to communicate genuine attention.
Okay, let's swing up to the Midwest. The place everyone thinks has no accent. The neutral zone.
Ah, the great neutral myth. The Midwest is linguistically fascinating. You've got those flat vowels, sometimes associated with Minnesota or the upper Midwest, that distinctive sort of lilt, and maybe the tag phrase, don't you know, it signals belonging.
But the big cities have something else going on.
Yes, especially in the inland north region, think Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo. That's where you really hear the northern cities vowel shift we talked about earlier.
And that shift can cause real confusion, like with your colleague in Milwaukee.
Oh, absolutely. That was a classic case. He has a pretty typical Wisconsin accent, influenced by that vowel shift and a certain nasal quality. He mentioned something about a European lady, but because of how his vowels were pronounced, specifically how the A in lady was shifted, the listener completely misheard it. Thought he said something, well, quite different and rather inappropriate. It wasn't the words, it was the sound colliding with the listener's expectations. Genuinely awkward. Proves even plain accents have specific challenges.
No accent is truly plain then. Okay, finally, the West. It feels vast and maybe less defined.
It's incredibly diverse and maybe still evolving rapidly because of migration patterns. California often dominates the perception, doesn't it? You have things like Valley Girl uptalk.
Where statements sound like questions, rising intonation at the end.
Exactly. It's a prosodic feature often picked up subconsciously, especially by younger speakers. But the West is so much more. Think about the huge influence of Spanish in the Southwest. That leads to distinct dialects like Chicano English, which isn't just accented English. It often blends syntax and vocabulary from both Spanish and English seamlessly. Then you go up to the Pacific Northwest, Seattle or Portland, and the accent tends to sound, well, crisper, maybe a bit more moderate in pace compared to California.
And we absolutely have to layer in the ethnic and indigenous dimensions here. It's not just about variations within English.
This is so important. The U.S. linguistic landscape includes many languages besides English. We have to distinguish between accent, how English is pronounced, and entirely different languages.
Like the story of the Navajo woman.
Yes, in Kayenta, Arizona. Someone told her, rather rudely, to speak English. She was, in fact, speaking Navajo, her native language. Her response was perfect and quite pointed. She said, "I was speaking Navajo. If you want English, go back to England." It's a powerful reminder that communication diversity here goes way beyond just English accents. True competence means respecting all linguistic forms.
That really broadens the perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
so we see the diversity, we understand the components, but why is it so hard sometimes? Let's move to the psychology. Section 3. The psychology behind processing accents. Why does listening to an unfamiliar accent feel like, well, mental gymnastics?
It really can. The main reason is something called cognitive load. Think about it. When you listen, your brain is constantly matching sounds to meanings stored in its internal dictionary. If the accent is familiar, that matching process is fast, automatic, effortless, low energy required.
But when it's unfamiliar,
Your brain has to work much, much harder. The sounds it's hearing don't quite match the expected patterns. It has to go into this high-effort decoding mode.
decoding mode, what's happening in the brain then?
It's struggling with phoneme categorization. A phone is a distinct sound unit in a language. Someone with an unfamiliar accent might produce a vowel sound that falls right in between two phonemes your brain is used to distinguishing. Is that sound an ah or an o? Is that an R sound or just nothing? Your brain has to use extra resources to figure out that ambiguity, constantly trying to build or adjust its auditory map in real time. All that extra processing increases cognitive load. It's genuinely tiring.
That makes sense. Feels like effort. And this effort influences how we interact, right?
Yeah.
Leading to things like accommodation.
Accommodation, yes. It's mostly subconscious. We tend to adjust our own speech slightly when talking to someone else, maybe matching their volume or speed, sometimes even subtly shifting our pronunciation closer to theirs. It's a social instinct, really, a way to build rapport, signal cooperation, make the communication smoother. I'm meeting you halfway, basically.
But when people try to force it, try to consciously fake an accent, it often backfires. Like that English immigrant example.
Oh, definitely. Conscious forced mimicry usually sounds unnatural, exaggerated. It becomes a caricature. The English guy trying hard to sound American. He wasn't matching subtle cues. He was probably overdoing certain sounds he thought were American. The result was so off that people said it sounded like he'd had a stroke. It shows that real accommodation is subtle, subconscious mirroring, not deliberate imitation.
And then there's the really difficult part.
Yeah.
How accents trigger bias and social perception.
This is huge. Accents are incredibly powerful social markers. They instantly signal things about where someone's from, maybe their social class, their education level. And unfortunately, this often leads to immediate unconscious biases. Non-native accents in particular sometimes get unfairly linked by listeners to lower competence or intelligence. It doesn't matter how fluent the speaker actually is, the accent itself triggers a bias.
We should call it what it is, linguistic racism or linguistic prejudice.
Precisely. Linguistic racism is when someone faces discrimination based on how they speak, their accent, their dialect. It can have real consequences affecting job prospects, how they're treated in school, social opportunities. If certain accents are consistently, even subconsciously, associated with negative stereotypes like incompetence, it creates a real barrier for speakers of those accents, no matter their actual abilities or C1 level mastery.
And lack of familiarity seems to make these biases even stronger, like the German listener's reaction.
That's a perfect illustration. This German person was fluent in standard broadcast American English, but when they encountered a thick Southern accent for the first time, they found it impossible. It wasn't that they didn't know English. It was a complete failure of pattern recognition. They had zero exposure to that specific sound system. The drawl, the vowel changes, the rhythm, the cognitive load was overwhelming, leading to a strong negative reaction. It really proves that familiarity helps break down both the listening effort and the associated biases.
Okay, so we have the mechanics, the psychology, the biases. Now let's look at where the rubber meets the road, the real-life consequences. Section 4, challenges and real-life lessons.
And the consequences can range from mildly amusing to critically serious. In high-stakes fields like healthcare or even complex business deals, a misunderstanding based on accent, a phonetic overlap, a misheard word can lead to genuine errors. Patient safety issues, contract disputes. It happens.
But sometimes it's less critical, just confusing, like the baked ziti incident in New York.
Yes. That one's a great example of phonetic overlap caused by drawl. The guy from Mississippi says, "It's a big city," but his southern drawl stretches out that I vowel sound. The New Yorker listening used to much shorter, clipped vowels. Here's that elongated I, and their brain maps it to the closest familiar sound pattern, which happens to be baked ziti. Completely different meaning. It seems absurd, but it shows how much our regional expectations filter what we hear.
And back to the more serious side, accents signaling otherness and triggering prejudice, even undermining credibility.
The story of the Cuban accented speaker is really troubling. Here's someone speaking English fluently, using some Spanish terms correctly within the conversation, but because their accent sounded foreign to the listener felt entitled to doubt their expertise, questioning the accuracy of the Spanish words themselves. The accent became a reason to dismiss the speaker's knowledge. It wasn't about the content, it was purely about the sound triggering a bias against perceived foreignness.
These individual stories really drive the point home. Let's run through that gallery of tales you mentioned, just to make these concepts stick for our listeners.
Okay, first, the professional risk. The northerner working construction in Birmingham, Alabama. He almost got fired. Why? Communication breakdown. He literally could not understand the deep southern accents of his foremen and co-workers, especially with specialized job site vocabulary mixed in. It led to mistakes, slowed things down. His technical skill was useless without basic comprehension.
Then there's the truly bizarre medical case. The Texas mother with foreign accent syndrome.
Yes, foreign accent syndrome. It's rare, but it's a real neurological condition, not psychological. After surgery, something affected the part of her brain controlling speech muscles. The result. She started speaking with what sounded exactly like a British accent, the rhythm, the vowels, everything. It wasn't imitation, it was a physical change in speech production. Shows how deeply accent is wired into our brains and bodies.
And the everyday struggle, like Kathy, the Australian.
Kathy's story highlights the pressure to conform. Her Australian way of saying simple words like butter or cider, probably non-erotic different vowel sounds, was constantly misunderstood in the US. It got so frustrating she admitted she started faking an American accent, consciously adding R sounds, changing vowels just to order food or buy things without hassle. Imagine the constant effort.
And even simple logistics get complicated in diverse places. The Brazilian in Grand Rapids.
Right. Grand Rapids, Michigan has a diverse population. This Brazilian speaker wasn't struggling with English overall, but with getting a specific address across. Likely due to differences in syllable stress or vowel sounds influenced by Portuguese, the listener just couldn't parse the street name or number correctly. Led to real navigation problems. Sometimes comprehension fails just on those key identifying words.
These examples really nail it. Understanding accents isn't just a bonus, it's core to C1 fluency. Okay, we've mapped the challenges. Let's give people some practical tools. Section 5, practical tips for mastering accent comprehension.
Absolutely. And the first step, maybe the most important, is mindset. You have to shift your perspective. Stop seeing accent variety as an obstacle and start seeing it as the reality, the vibrant, complex reality of American English. You have to embrace it.
Okay, mindset adjusted. What's the first practical strategy for actually improving comprehension?
Exposure, exposure, exposure. If you struggle with, say, subtle accents, you need to actively listen to them. A lot. Find podcasts produced in the South, watch local news clips from that region online, seek out movies or TV shows where actors are using that specific accent authentically. Targeted, repeated listening is how you train your brain to recognize the patterns and reduce that cognitive load.
Makes sense. And should we just listen passively, or is there more active work to do, like phonetic training?
Active work definitely helps. Phonetic training can involve really focusing on minimal pairs, words that differ by just one sound, like ship versus sheep or pin versus pen. There are apps and resources for this. By practicing producing the subtle sound differences characteristic of an accent you find difficult, you're also training your ear to hear and categorize those sounds correctly when others use them. Mouth and ear work together.
Okay, so exposure and practice. What about when you're actually in a difficult conversation? What can you do in the moment?
Rely on context clues. If you hit a word or phrase you just don't understand because of the accent, don't panic and fixate only on the sound. Pull back for a second. Ask yourself, what's the topic? Where are we? Who am I talking to? What was said just before? Use the surrounding information, the situation, the vocabulary you did understand to make an educated guess about the meaning of the tricky part. Context is your friend.
And it's okay to admit you didn't understand. Asking for clarification.
Absolutely. Okay. In fact, it's much better than just nodding along pretending you got it. Being an active, engaged listener sometimes means asking for help. But try to be specific and polite instead of just, what? Maybe try, sorry, I didn't quite catch that last part about the topic. Could you say it again, or could you spell that name place for me? People usually appreciate that you're making an effort to truly understand.
Good point. Finally, you mentioned positive mimicry earlier. Can you clarify how to use that constructively?
Right. The key is positive and private. This is not about mimicking someone to them or making fun. It's a private practice tool. Try listening to a short clip of an accent you want to understand better, and then, alone, try to imitate the rhythm, the intonation, the key vowel sounds. It helps build muscle memory for your mouth, which reinforces the auditory patterns in your brain. It builds empathy for how that accent works physically, but strictly for practice, never for performance or mockery.
That combination of exposure, practice, context, clarification, and maybe some private mimicry, that sounds like a solid plan, like the learner in Chicago you mentioned.
Exactly. That person made a conscious effort. They didn't just wait for exposure to happen, they sought it out. Joined language exchange groups with diverse speakers, attended workshops focused on different U.S. accents. By intentionally listening to Boston, Southern, Midwestern speakers, they actively retrained their ear. Confusion turned into comprehension, which led to better conversations and ultimately more meaningful connections. It showed that focused effort really pays off.
It really does. So we've gone from Maria's coffee order mishap in New York, all across the linguistic map of the U.S. and into the psychology of listening. What's clear is that accents are just woven into the fabric of conversation today. And for you, the advanced learner, navigating these variations isn't just about being understood. It's maybe even more about understanding others, developing empathy, and getting past those unconscious biases we all carry. As you continue your own advanced listening practice, try to carry this awareness with you. Every variation you hear, every drawl, every clipped syllable, every unique pronunciation, it reflects a history, a community, a person's identity. So maybe the final thought we want to leave you with is this. The real mark of advanced fluency might not be perfecting one single accent yourself. Perhaps it's more about becoming a truly skilled and empathetic listener in a world full of diverse voices. Because aiming for one standard, in today's world, that just feels like a fantasy. If you found this deep dive valuable and helpful for your C1 level advanced English listening practice, please do like this video, share it with others who might benefit, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab channel to continue your learning journey with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.